The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away from every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does, he prunes, so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather around them and burn them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." The Gospel of the Lord. Many of you know that I was on vacation the last couple of weeks in Italy. And I went with a good friend of mine, Father Tyler from Michigan. He was a classmate of mine in the seminary. And so we arrived on a Monday, and we did what any good pilgrim does when they first arrive in Rome. We returned to our favorite cafe from student days. And in this beautiful cafe, it overlooks all of Rome. It's right near the seminary where we went. And it's right in front of the neighbor of the seminary, Bambino Gesù Hospital, the famous children's hospital that the Vatican runs nearby. We were sitting there. We had just ordered our drinks. We had a few different snacks that they had brought out. And at that moment, this Italian man walks up to me from across the street. And he asks, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yes." I saw this in Italian. And he said, "So you speak English and Italian?" I said, "Well, I speak English. My Italian is a little iffy." But I was like, "Father Tyler over here actually speaks fluent Italian." And he does. Now, the interesting thing is we were not dressed as priests. We were in regular clothes. Very stylish, I'm sure, but maybe not. But we were just in regular clothes, and he had no way of knowing that we were priests. In fact, I don't even think I said Father Tyler speaks good Italian. I think I said just Tyler speaks good Italian. So he said, "I need your help because we need somebody to translate between this Italian doctor at the hospital and a French doctor who only speaks French and English who's on the phone." So Father Tyler gets up and goes with him. I watched our drinks and prayed my rosary and waited about 20 minutes. When Father Tyler came back, he was pretty sad. He said, "Well, the situation is that this man, another man, they're the uncles of this little 11-year-old girl named Francesca. And Francesca had cancerous tumors on her heart and in her lungs, and it was inoperable. So this French doctor is a specialist in this in Paris, and they called him to see if they could send the records to him to look at and maybe give a second opinion. Well, the French doctor told Father Tyler on the phone, "Don't tell the family this, but if Bambino Gesù is one of the best pediatric oncology systems in the country, so there's no way I'm going to be able to tell them something they don't already know about this." So he translated what he needed to translate for them, and then he came back. And the two men came with them. And they bought our drinks, and they each had a beer with us. So you have these two Italian men who are the uncles of this girl joining with us. And Father Tyler was talking with them, and they expressed the way that they felt, that it was difficult for them to understand how this could be happening as men of faith. They were both devout Catholic men. And Father Tyler did a beautiful job of explaining really the problem of evil, how it is that God can work through this. And he didn't do it with theory. because that doesn't all, even though theory is true, it doesn't always help in times of struggle. But he did it through stories of his time in the parish as a priest and from his own life, when God has brought great good out of great suffering, beginning with his own son. The interesting thing is that Father Tyler wasn't really able to help them as a translator, but that's not why God put him into their lives at that moment. He put him into their lives because at that moment they needed not a translator but a priest. They needed to realize they were still connected to the vine, that Francesca was still connected to that vine. And acting in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, Father Tyler was able to do that in that moment. Jesus is clear that he is the vine, and we are the branches. And this is pretty easy to understand. By baptism, we're grafted onto that vine. And then that life comes through the vine into the branches. It comes especially through the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of the Eucharist. But then he talks about pruning. And pruning can be more difficult to understand. Because if you're not a master gardener, I'm not, I look at a plant that looks like it's doing just fine. And the master gardener comes and makes all these cuttings that seem to harm and reduce the beauty of the vine. And yet, if you wait a season, that pruning allows it to grow back with greater life, with greater beauty, and adding more beauty to the totality of that garden. It's a counterintuitive process, this idea of pruning. But it's part of our lives. We know that whether we believe or not, we're going to encounter suffering in this life. But Christ is the one who, as the master gardener, can bring greater life out of this. Christ didn't spare his own family and friends from that suffering. And he didn't spare himself most of all, as he died on the cross and brought about from the greatest evil the greatest good. And we're not just connected to Christ in this. In that vine, we're all connected to each other. We're all one plant. As St. Paul talks about so often, we're one body in Christ. When one member of the body is suffering, we all suffer. When one member of the body is rejoicing, we're all rejoicing. So that even when we are doing well and we have a joyful spirit, we should be cognizant of those who are suffering. And when we're suffering, we should feel ourselves being bolstered by Christ and by the community of the church. I was at the Dominion High School musical last night, which is excellent, by the way. You can still see it today, the last performance at 3. And it's literally High School Musical, the Disney show. And they have a great ending scene, which is all about we're all in this together. And I'd already written my homily, so I thought, that's perfect. You know, what a great way to go into the night before the homily. We're all in this together because we really are, especially as Christians. As the baptized, we are all in this together. And somehow, it's only really possible in the Catholic faith that you have 2 priests from America in a cafe over in Italy, and you have 2 men from Basilicata, the countryside of Italy, and through that encounter now, this girl Francesca, who's never met any of us, including me, is now being prayed for in this parish, in Virginia, and is being prayed for in Michigan, in Father Tyler's parish. And I say both parishes because really, in a way, I stole this homily from Father Tyler, which brings me to my final vignette. I was on a little day-long retreat with the Legion of Mary up in Pennsylvania at the Sacred Heart Shrine, and afterwards we went to Gettysburg to eat at a restaurant. The table was going to take about 30 to 45 minutes to get ready. So while the Legion of Mary went around to different shops, I sat in the parking lot and waited for the table, selflessly. And as I was sitting there waiting, I decided to call Father Tyler to pass the time. He always answers the phone. A lot of people don't take my calls, but he does. So I called Father Tyler, and we're talking. He was talking about Francesca. This thing was on our mind a lot. And we were talking about the vine and the branches. And he was talking about how he's going to include that in his homily. And you'll use that as the vignette for his homily. And he said, you should do the same thing because you'll get your parish praying for this girl Francesca and her family. But I'd already written my homily. So I told him maybe. And then when I hung up, I said no. Well, as I was sitting there, again, in just like a random town in Pennsylvania in a parking lot, this guy comes up to me and says, are you a priest locally? And I said, yes, I'm from here in Arlington. And as a little background, Father Tyler is Mr. Padre Pio. I mean, that's like his main saint. He spent a year down in San Giovanni Rotondo learning Italian and living with two doctors who work in the Padre Pio Hospital. And that became his adopted family. We were just in San Giovanni Rotondo a few weeks ago, and Father Tyler goes around and brings the relic to different places that he has a little relic, and he belongs to the Padre Pio Prayer Association. So he's basically the second coming of Padre Pio in that sense. So this guy comes up and says, are you a priest here locally? I said, yeah, from Arlington. He sits down with me, and he has a box. He's like, well, I just want to show you something. And he pulled the box out of a Jeep, which is interesting. So he pulls it out, sits down, opens the box, and there's one of Padre Pio's gloves. Now, Padre Pio, if you don't know, had the stigmata, so he had the wounds of Christ, and so he had to wear gloves to soak up the blood. And it was his glove, just sitting there, that I could touch with the blood stains on it, and his rosary. This guy's mother had been a nurse with the army, and she was stationed in San Giovanni Rotondo after the war for a few months. And she got to know Padre Pio and helped take care of his wounds. And as a thank you gift, when she left, he gave her one of his gloves and his rosary. And this guy was traveling from L.A. to Philadelphia to bring this glove to a dying person, and just happened to be eating in this restaurant and saw me dressed as a priest and brought it to me. So if that's not God bludgeoning me over the head about what my homily should be about, I don't know. But it brings us to the last point, the idea that it's not just us that are in it together, and we're not just grafted onto the vine together, but we also have the saints. St. Padre Pio was really interceding in that moment. And St. Padre Pio is just one of a countless cloud of witnesses, as the book of Hebrews says, that all of these who have gone before us, who have had many of the same sufferings we have. In fact, you can find, no matter what you're going through, I guarantee you can find a saint who's gone through the same thing or worse, who remained faithful and achieved heaven out of it. So we're really bolstered in that. The idea that there is these thousands of saints who are not only an example, but also intercessors, who are praying for us, who are praying for the Universal Church, who are praying for Francesca and her family. As Catholics, we're never cut off from the communion of saints or from the vine that is Christ. So today, let's pray for Francesca, and as a parish community, pray for and build up one another, because we are all in this together.